Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all. Today we have that prolific researcher and author, passenger Daniel Friedman from New York, joining us to expand on what he's found out about the secret origins of Sherlock Holmes, specifically what real-life experiences Arthur Conan Doyle used in creating his famous character. So it sounds an intriguing subject. I'm really looking forward to seeing Dan's presentation and hearing his talk. As usual, we're recording this meeting, and after suitable editing, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Thanks to our new video producer, John Rewald, who was with us today, for doing this. We'll be letting everybody know when the video is up on YouTube. Little news for the Society. The next issue of our Passengers Log is being worked on right now, and we hope to be getting it to you in the mail in the next 10 or 12 days. So a bit of Christmas reading for you coming your way soon. In some media news, production was completed on the third film in the Enola Holmes series in mid-2025. Netflix hasn't announced a release date yet, but talk online is probably released in the first half of 2026. Also coming in 2026 sometime is the Young Sherlock 8-episode TV series, directed by Guy Ritchie, who did the Jude Law and Robert Downey Jr. movies. He's directing this TV series and stars hero Fiennes Stiffen as a 19-year-old Holmes. Looking forward to that one. And filming of the True Sherlock series was announced some time ago to begin in January next month. But the only recent news so far is that an animated series is also being developed. This is reported as being a series aimed at adult viewers, with each season focusing on a specific mystery, with individual episodes tying into some of the original stories. So on some of the canonical anniversaries for this month, on the 3rd of December 1878, Mary Mawson's father returned to London and disappeared the same night. On the 22nd December of an unknown year, John Horner was accused of stealing the blue carbuncle from the Countess of Morcar. And on that same date, Mr. Breckenridge of Covent Garden bought 24 geese from Mrs. Oakshott and sold them to Mr. Windigate of the Alpha Inn, so leading into the adventure of the Blue Carbuncle story. And also on an unknown date in December 1894, Miss Violet Smith first met Mr. Carruthers and Mr. Woodley, which eventually drove her to seek help from Sherlock Holmes in April the following year, which Dr. Watson recorded as the adventure of the solitary cyclist. So there's some dates that happened around this month. Show and tell. Has anybody got some new purchases they want to let us all know about? Lee or Stuart, you're a prolific book buyer, so maybe you might have something to show us.
I thought this time if there's a minute or two, I could just share my little collection of half a dozen audio Sherlock Holmes things.
Sure, go right ahead.
All right.
Yep.
I'm not sure if these are available on CD or not, but I've got a number of Christopher Lee's readings on cassette, and there's the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes, The Adventure of the Sussex Vampire, and others. These are all published by HarperCollins, and I've got The Valley of Fear. There might be other Christopher Lee ones. Here's one that he did on CD, which is unabridged 4 stories, including The Lion's Mane and others. And I've got a couple of other curiosities, which are a radio drama of The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Oh, yeah.
That one, Footprints of the Hound by Edith Meiser. That was done in Canada in 2001. The Immortal Sherlock Holmes, which was the Orson Welles radio production, the original Mercury Theatre radio production. And lastly, this one's 4 short stories by Conan Doyle on the Naxos audio label. Not Holmesian stories, though. It's classic stuff like Lot Number 249, The Mummy Story, and other ones by Doyle. So there you go.
You must be one of the few people left that's got a cassette recorder, is that right?
I've got a cassette recorder. I'm going to see if there are CD versions though,
Yeah, good.
or even streaming versions.
Yes, there probably are streaming versions these days. Okay, thanks very much for that. Anybody else got anything they want to share with us? Stuart, you got any new books you haven't reviewed yet?
Yeah, look, I've got a. This is the second volume of a trilogy by Charles Blankstein, in which this is Sherlock Holmes, the seamstress, and the Colonel being Colonel Sebastian Moran, and it's what it does is combines Sherlock Holmes with Jack the Ripper and the Cleveland Street scandal, and he crosses over um, characters from one to the other, and then combines people from the canon, such as Professor Moriarty and Colonel Sebastian Moran. It's quite interesting, and it's worth a read. This is the second volume. The third one's not out yet, and halfway through this, so it's good. And I look forward to having read the whole trilogy.
Great, thank you. Stuart's one of our prolific reviewers for the logs. We're very grateful to him for his book reviews he puts in almost every issue. Thanks a lot. Okay, well, if that's the end of the show and tell session, we can kick over to Dan and his presentation on the secret origins of Sherlock Holmes. Take it away, Dan. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully that is coming into share view. How's it looking? Is it good?
Looking good.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to fire away. Well, today I'm excited to dig into the secret origins of Sherlock Holmes. For the next hour, we'll follow the trail from Arthur Conan Doyle's early childhood to Holmes's scientific methods. We're going to detour through medical schools, boxing rings, and whaling decks, and finish our journey discussing a surprising literary giant, Nathaniel Hawthorne, whose Scarlet Letter left its own crimson fingerprint on Baker Street. I got to remember to hit the slide button too. For almost 140 years, Sherlock Holmes has thrilled us with those razor-sharp powers of deduction. Sure, the packaging keeps changing. Magazines turn into stage plays, radio mysteries give way to Hollywood blockbusters, Basil Rathbone hands over the baton to Benedict Cumberbatch. But the pleasure never changes. We don't just learn who the culprit is, we witness the reasoning that makes revelation possible. And Holmes, he's timeless. He can assist Batman in Gotham City, unmask ghosts with Scooby-Doo and the gang, and hunt down a modern-day serial killer through London, all without breaking character. That's because Holmes is adaptable, ubiquitous, a literary immortal. His enduring popularity helps explain why Sherlockian societies flourish across the globe, from London to Tokyo, New York to Sydney. Every reread or retelling feels fresh, a new set of clues for us to follow. Doyle built the canon like a house with secret doors. You open one, and you find yourself tapping every panel to discover what else is tucked inside. Before Doyle came along, detective fiction often ran on convenient coincidences and flimsy contrivances, a confession in the nick of time, a clue planted because the author needed it, plots that drifted into farce. Doyle did something radical. He swapped luck for logic, irrationality for reason. Holmes observes, infers, tests, and then my favorite part, explains. So we not only get the solution, but watch the gears of his mind turn. Gravel in a horse's hoof becomes a map. The angle of mud on a shirt sleeve tells you which way the carriage was traveling. A pinch of ash on a windowsill eliminates every brand but one. So here's the question that drives the next hour. Did Doyle build that precision machine from scratch? Or did life teach it to him, piece by piece? Let's find out. To trace Holmes's secret origins, we must begin in Edinburgh, Doyle's birthplace, where the Georgian New Town, bright with enlightenment symmetry, rises opposite the Old Town, which clambers up Castle Hill in a tangle of medieval winds and narrow time-worn closes. In the space of 10 minutes, you could browse a bookshop, cross the street into the clatter of a printer's press, slip into a toxicology lecture at Surgeon's Hall, and finish in a tavern listening to a bait on the soul. The Athens of the North trains its children in two opposite habits, the need for evidence and the hunger for a really good story. Place both in the same individual, nourish him with chemistry, anatomy, and anecdote, and you create a mind that can make a microscope sing. Doyle would make Holmes feel like Edinburgh itself, half test tube, half stage actor. However, Edinburgh's brilliance carried with it a grisly past. 30 years before Doyle was born, the city was shaken to its core from the diabolical deeds of William Burke and William Hare, resurrectionists, meaning nighttime grave robbers who slipped into cemeteries, pried open coffins, and sold the corpses to medical schools. Eventually, grave robbing became a little bit too much work, so they made a terrible modification to their business model. They stopped digging and started killing. Their scheme collapsed when a body was discovered hidden in hay, and the pair were hauled in. Citizens demanded answers. Enter Edinburgh physician and pioneering forensic scientist Robert Christensen, tasked with answering a terrifyingly simple question: were these bodies exhumed or slain? Christensen believed bruises weren't just stains, but timestamps. And to prove it, he did the unthinkable. In the dissecting room, he struck cadavers with wooden rods, meticulously charting the rainbow shift of color hour by hour, and determined beyond doubt that Burke and Hare's merchandise bore the mark of strangulation, not resurrection. Hare turned king's evidence. Burke swung from the gallows. The city learned a new creed. The dead carry data and evidence, and when patiently read, it does not lie. That lesson was imprinted on young Arthur. In A Study in Scarlet, Doyle tips his hat to Christensen's cold method when Stanford quips that Holmes is a little too scientific when it comes to beating the subjects in the dissecting room with a stick. It's a macabre joke with a manifesto inside it. No hunches, no tidy confessions. Guilt requires proof. Doyle took the matches he heard as a child and spliced them directly into Holmes's DNA. The Doyle household ran on creativity, ink, and nerve. Grandfather John, disguising his name behind the initials HB, satirized Parliament so deftly that he could still dine with the very men he lampooned. His caricatures never descended into cruelty or the grotesque. He rendered politicians with wit and precision, yet always with a certain courtesy, preserving their dignity while making his point. Although admired by the public at large, HB cared little for recognition. In Baker Street, Holmes conducts himself in the same manner, exposing corruption without parading it, protecting reputations while uncovering the truth. When his cases shook the nation, he still refused publicity, often declining to let his name appear in print. How many times has Holmes shielded politicians, aristocrats, athletes, even royalty from scandal, revealing just enough to set things right while leaving the rest hidden? This streak of artistry and integrity ran throughout the family. Doyle's father, Charles, even while wrestling with the storms of mental illness, produced fanciful illustrations, including the first images of Holmes created for the novelized A Study in Scarlet. Doyle's uncle Richard, a brilliant Punch magazine illustrator, sacrificed a lucrative career rather than betray his religious convictions. In the Doyle family, imagination, moral conduct, and discretion were not mere traits. They were hereditary forces. So when Holmes, in The Greek Interpreter, mentions that his grandmother was a Verney, Doyle isn't name-dropping. He's placing Holmes within an artistic dynasty, as if to say, just as the Doyles produced 3 generations of noteworthy artists, so too did the family of Holmes. It lends the detective a bloodline of artistry, not on canvas, but in the subtle strokes of deduction, in the ability to see what others overlook. And Doyle also uses the canon to showcase his own appreciation of art. A Corot quietly hangs on the wall in The Sign of the Four, while a Groisset hints at Moriarty's wealth in the Valley of Fear. Such touches are not incidental. They disclose the aesthetic eye behind the pen. And in the end, Holmes himself emerges as the ultimate masterpiece, painted from 2 dynasties of genius, the Verneys and the Doyles. Arthur's mother, Mary Doyle, read to him constantly Arthurian chivalry, Shakespeare's tragedies, and the works of Edinburgh's own great writers, Scott and Burns. until storytelling wrapped itself around his entire soul. Thanks to his mother, the writing bug bit him early. At the precocious age of 5, Conan Doyle wrote and illustrated his first tale, a horror story about a man-eating tiger. And Mary, strikingly beautiful and socially fearless, was comfortable in the company of younger men. So when Brian Waller, a rich, handsome 20-year-old medical student and respected poet, began lodging in her home, well, the walls, including her boudoir, hummed with speculation. Mary was 15 years his senior, and many researchers, myself included, believe their intimacy went far beyond parlor talk and poetry. To be honest, Waller certainly supported her, very generously. She lived rent-free on his Mason-Gill estate for more than a decade. That kind of arrangement usually signals a bond that's far stronger than mere friendship. I, as well as others, strongly suspect that Mary may have borne him a child, possibly two. That same 15-year generation gap turns up in A Case of Identity, framed by its haunting observation. Life is infinitely stranger than anything which the mind of man could invent. Doyle wasn't being philosophical when he wrote that line. He was exposing the tumultuous drama unfolding in his own life. And as for Brian Waller, well, let's not cast him as a villain. Whatever else he was, he believed in young Arthur. He was one of the first people who looked at him and said, you could be something remarkable. And sometimes encouragement, even from a complicated source, can alter the entire direction of a life. It was Waller who nudged Arthur towards medicine and writing, syringe in one hand, pen in the other. Still, to keep her private life hidden from her sharp-eyed son, and to protect him from the whispers about her affairs or a situation she wasn't ready to explain, Mary Doyle sent Arthur away to live with her best friend, Mary Hill Burton. Burton was a formidable social reformer whose dinner table served votes for the woman with the soup and righteous divorce laws with the roast. Those ideas took root and resurfaced on Baker Street. Holmes honors Irene Adler as the woman, an equal mind, not a plot device. And in The Devil's Foot, Holmes thunders against the deplorable divorce laws of England, sounding very much like a Burton dinner guest. The result is a detective with a chemist's method and an ethicist conscience, one who not only asks, is it legal, but is it just? From Mary Hill Burton, Doyle absorbed a blueprint for justice. From Mary Doyle, he inherited imagination and fire. And from Brian Waller, he gained ambition and also a path. And Sherlock Holmes, when he finally takes rooms at Baker Street, he's a composite of all three. But Mary wasn't the only Burton who shaped Doyle during those formative years. There was another Burton who proved just as instrumental. Mary's brother, noted historian John Hill Burton. Living close by, he welcomed Arthur into a household known for its eccentric touches, including the resident green specter, said to haunt every room except the library. In those afternoons under John's roof, Doyle acquired two lifelong habits. First, keep an open mind for the uncanny. The world is stranger than we expect. Second, when in doubt, go to the books. The library, the only room untouched by the family green specter, becomes a kind of parable. Knowledge is an exorcism. And Doyle carried that lesson straight into Holmes, whose approach to the supernatural was always the same. Check the facts, consult the record, and keep your feet on the ground, even while the world around you insists on floating. And then there's John's son, Willie. He and Doyle hiked the trails together, tinkered with cameras and developing solutions, and created minor explosions in their makeshift chemistry laboratory. Willie went on to become a world-class engineer in Japan, designing water filtration plants that saved cities from cholera epidemics. And crucially for our story, he published the first technical manual to introduce sumo, whose official English translation is the Japanese system of wrestling. File that one under This Will Matter. When Doyle resurrects Holmes after Reichenbach, he gives his hero a miraculous escape technique called, and I quote, Boritsu, or the Japanese system of wrestling. That's Doyle's private thank you note, a nod to Willie's Japanese years and his how-to book. Yes, historians in the audience will wave a hand and say Bartitsu with two T's belongs to E.W. Barton Wright's hybrid art of boxing and cane fighting. But Doyle drops that first T purposely and has Holmes state in the empty house that he employed the Japanese system of wrestling to survive Reichenbach Falls. That system being sumo and only sumo, an art form first described to the Western world by his best friend, William Burden. Doyle's early education came not only from his mother's books, but from the rough streets that raised him. At the age of 5, yes, 5, he was initiated into the Sens Hill Boys, one of Edinburgh's street gangs, and by sheer stubbornness and a quick right hook, became their champion. He learned the physics of a fist, the value of lookouts, and how quickly pride attracts bruising. His world makes a reappearance on Baker Street as the Irregulars, loyal, street-smart kids who hear what adults miss, take a punch if they must, and would do anything for their leader, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. School later swapped gang brawling for formal instruction. A boxing master during his high school years taught him the Queensberry rules: footwork, timing, distance, turning raw aggression into a scientific craft. Holmes inherits the upgrade, not just a brain in a chair, but a trained fighter who can handle himself in Allison's rooms and then go on to deduce a person's tailor from the stitching of his jacket. Doyle was an admirer of Edinburgh native Robert Louis Stevenson. In fact, Doyle's career even spiked when his anonymously published J. Habakkuk Jeffson statement was mistakenly credited to his literary idol. Starstruck, Doyle sent letter after letter to Stevenson, who at that time was living on the island of Samoa. None were answered. So Doyle tried a bold, unconventional move. He took one of Stevenson's masterpieces and reimagined it as a home story of his own. The Sign of the Four is Doyle's deliberate counterpoint to Treasure Island, a study in parallels and opposites. Both tales give us a one-legged antagonist, Jonathan Small, and Long John, same first name, John, opposite physiques. Yet their quest moves in reverse directions. Both involve treasure chests, but look at the contrasts. Doyle's is a solid iron strongbox containing diamonds and emeralds, no gold or silver. Stevenson's, on the other hand, is a wooden sea chest hiding silver and gold, no precious stones. And in each story, the map points less to latitude than to betrayal, the treacheries that steer every man. Even that much debated post office scene in The Sign of the Four is a tribute to Stevenson. You'll remember that Watson sends a telegram from a non-existent Wigmore Street post office instead of the real branch at 66 Baker Street. That slip is deliberate. Doyle is opening his Stevenson-inspired adventure in Cavendish Square, the very site of Dr. Lanyon's consulting rooms where Stevenson starts off his Jekyll and Hyde. In other words, Doyle lays Stevenson's map over London, then moves Holmes around it, a private tip of the deerstalker to his hero. And here's the punchline I love. When Stevenson finally wrote back, he failed to notice the parallels. That's how completely Doyle absorbed the material, not by copying sentences, but by borrowing weather systems. The pirate sea adventure with a telescope becomes the detective land adventure with a magnifying glass. Polished, elegant, unmistakably Holmes, unmistakably Doyle. Back to Edinburgh's darker classrooms. At Newington Academy, Doyle's first school, French master Eugene Chantrel seduced a 15-year-old pupil, married her, and when she died of charcoal gas, a not uncommon fate in the 19th century, Edinburgh's top forensic mind said otherwise. Dr. Henry Littlejohn, the city's medical legal expert and later Doyle's professor, proved that Chantrel had slipped a heavy dose of opium into her supper, then turned on the gas taps as stagecraft. Chantrel was eventually convicted and hanged. The lesson for young Doyle was brutal and permanent. Emotions are camouflage, chemical analysis tells the truth. No surprise then that Holmes would be a trained and gifted chemist, applying himself to solving crime scientifically. You can almost hear that judge's gavel strike in the cannon. In Silver Blaze, the opium-laced curried mutton sends the stable boy to sleep and hides a crime in plain sight. Chantrell on the witness stand, Edinburgh's lab culture shouting from the gallery, "Follow the compound, not the alibi." Doyle hammers the point elsewhere too. The poisoned thorn and blowpipe of the sign of the four, the pharmacological nightmare of the devil's foot. Case after case, emotions are to be suppressed, motive make noise, but toxicology makes law. After a bumpy start in Edinburgh, 9-year-old Doyle is shipped off to Stonyhurst, a rural Jesuit school in northern England. He arrives just as one of the most sensational events in Victorian Britain is unfolding, the Tichborne trial. At the center of the drama was an audacious impostor who claimed to be Roger Tichborne, the long-lost heir to a family fortune. Because the real Roger had once been a student at Stonyhurst, several of Doyle's teachers were called into court as witnesses. In the end, it was the details from Roger's actual Stonyhurst years, small facts only a real student at the school would have known, that finally cracked the case wide open. On the witness stand, the impostor was unable to describe the school's odd little customs, most memorably the rules of bandy, Stonyhurst's own winter sport, and his masquerade collapsed like a house of cards. Doyle files that away. Years later, in a case of identity, a stepfather dons a disguise to steal an inheritance, and Holmes proves, once again, that impostor dies under cross-examination by particulars. But Stonyhurst did much more than school Doyle in legal theater. It steeped him in Lancashire law. All around lay Pendle Hill and the Ribble Valley, striker country, where a black death hound was said to prowl dark paths near the River Hodder. On campus, the boys whispered of another specter, 9-year-old Richard Francis Sherburne, last of his line, condemned to haunt the dark alley where he had died after having eaten poisonous dewberries. Put those strands together and you can almost feel the Hound of the Baskervilles forming. A Gothic landscape, a family curse, used that poison and shelter, a spectral hound on the moor, and a detective who trusts a single print in the soil over 10 sworn statements. Even Baskerville Hall borrows its Elizabethan and Gothic architectural elements from Stonyhurst. Doyle only made one true friend during his 7 years at Stonyhurst, James Ryan, and together they engineered a running prank that was equal parts chemistry lesson and social experiment. On the train from Edinburgh to Stonyhurst, they sat near but never with each other, eyes fixed on a chosen milepost. At the signal, Ryan tugged a hidden fuse on their cachet of firecrackers while Doyle played the dramatist, a booming cry of "Fire!" and a dash of mark alarm. Pandemonium followed, hats snatched, baskets overturned, passengers diving for the floor, until the last pop faded and the carriage filled with embarrassed laughter and acrid smoke. In the third year, their routine misfired, literally. A premature blast shredded Ryan's hand, and with the infirmary visit, the investigators came calling. There were apologies to the railway, stern letters from Stonyhurst, and a nickname that clung to James like soot, Gunpowder Ryan. That boyhood caper makes its way into the Holmes canon, where it's transformed into one of Sherlock's most cunning methods of gathering information. In A Scandal in Bohemia, Holmes hands Watson a plumber's smoke rocket, the very kind used to test leaky flues, and tells him how to hurl it through Eileen Adler's window and shout the same magic word, "Fire." Why? Because panic reveals priorities. In the frenzy of a false alarm, people run to the thing they value most. Irene goes straight to the hidden photograph. It's the train ride transposed on Briony Lodge. A controlled burst, a crowd's reflex, and a secret flushed into the open. The prank also foreshadows Holmes's broader playbook: feints, disguises, stage crises, channeled into detection. Doyle may have outgrown the fireworks, but he never abandoned the principle. When you can't see the truth, create a harmless disturbance and watch where everyone runs. And that self-lighting plumber's rocket owes its genesis to William Burden's uncle, Cosmo Innes, a man Doyle knew very well during his childhood. This plot device is yet another subtle tribute to his second family, the Burdens. One of the few teachers at Stonyhurst who showed Doyle even a spoonful of kindness was Father Cyprian Splain. Kind, yes, but man, did he have a gift for telling ghastly tales. His favorite party piece was De Rascher, a grim little shocker that burrowed into Doyle's young brain. As Doyle was enjoying the tale of murder and mystery, his mother unexpectedly stopped writing letters to him. So Arthur, 14 and theatrical, staged a crisis by post. He wrote home claiming that the third prefect had gone stark, raving mad at vespers, Mr. Crea, no less, waving a handkerchief like a battle flag and muttering Doyle's name in his delirium. The whole thing was pure invention, and the name was a wink only a puzzle lover would catch. Crea equals Rasche, the German word for revenge. And yes, Mr. Crea only existed in fantasy. He was never a student nor teacher at the school. That adolescent hoax becomes the seed of Holmes's debut. When Rasche appears scrawled in blood on a wall in A Study in Scarlet, police rush to read it as Rachel, but Holmes, who like his creator speaks the language of clues, treats it as a cipher and a motive in one word. Doyle wasn't just trolling Scotland Yard. He was restaging a schoolboy prank at a higher level. A fabricated madness becomes a manufactured mystery. An anagram becomes an investigation. And once you see that through line, you spot the habit everywhere in the canon. Letters as traps in the 5 Orange Pips, catechisms turn treasure maps in the Musgrave Ritual, ciphers that move across a page in the Dancing Men. Splain fed Doyle the taste for vengeance tales. Doyle added the prankster pleasure in wordplay as evidence. And Holmes was born with the instinct that sometimes the surest path to the truth lies hidden in a single telling word. When you think of Sherlock Holmes, you probably picture a very serious fellow with almost superhuman powers of observation and deduction. Believe it or not, those abilities were modeled on a real man, Dr. Joseph Bell, Doyle's anatomy professor, whose party trick was a kind of professional X-ray vision laced with mind reading. Bell could walk into a room and, before a word was spoken, tell a patient something about themselves and their doings gleaned solely from observation of their persons or clothing. One of his best-known classroom tales involved a patient who claimed to be nothing more than a shoemaker and denied ever having served in the army. Bell sensed the man was lying and ordered the man's shirt to be removed. And there it was, a small blue D branded under his left breast, the indelible mark of a deserter from the Crimean War. But the real lesson wasn't the dramatic gotcha at the end. It was his methodical approach. Bell wasn't guessing or performing magic. He was demonstrating that the principles of observation and deduction were teachable skills. Doyle said as much, and others saw it too, including Robert Louis Stevenson. After Doyle achieved fame, Stevenson finally wrote Doyle a semi-congratulatory note that closed with the sly question, "Only the one thing troubles me. Can this be my old friend Joe Bell?" The answer, as Doyle had already admitted to the press, was yes, Holmes was in part modeled on Bell. Bell's observational gospel becomes Holmes's maxim. Listen to Holmes in the Copper Beeches. Pshaw, my dear fellow, what do the public, the great unobservant public, who could hardly tell a weaver by his tooth or a compositor by his left thumb, care about the finer shades of analysis? Translation, I am a student of Bell, and he has taught me well. And once you recognize Bell's trademarks, you'll see them all over Baker Street. In The Sign of the Four, a smear of little reddish mold on Watson's instep leads home to the Wigmore Street post office. Precisely the same sort of inference Bell once made from the clay on a patient's shoes as Doyle looked on. In The Valley of Fear, Holmes reads identity from tattoo marks. another of Bell's specialties. Even Holmes's motto could have been mounted over Bell's lecture table. You know my method. It is founded upon the observation of trifles. Small facts, tested inferences, a conclusion explained step by step. And this teaching style, Doyle ports over that too. Bell never gave just the answer. He walked his students through his chain of reasoning so they could see which features carried which meaning. Holmes does the same professorial reveal at case's end, turning private cognition into a public lesson. That's why these stories feel fair. The clues were there. You simply weren't trained by Joe Bell. Doyle was, and he passed that knowledge over to Holmes. Dr. Thomas Richard Fraser, Doyle was professor of materia medica, didn't treat poisons as melodrama. He turned it into a teachable science. A pioneer of experimental pharmacology, Fraser investigated how snake venoms and plant alkaloids act on the body and pushed forward the idea that specific toxins could be met with specific remedies, antitoxins. Under his tutelage, Doyle learned that a mystery substance isn't a plot twist. It's a system you can classify, test, and teach. That's why the speckled band slithers straight out of Fraser's lecture theater. A villain deploying a deadly snake isn't Gothic showmanship. It's applied toxicology. But if Fraser gave Doyle serpents, he also gave Holmes smoke. Fraser's obituary notes his unexpected interest and even fascination with everyday intoxicants, tobacco, and alcohol, right next to arrow poisons and ordeal beans. That pharmacologists itch to sort, compare, and prove becomes pure Holmes. He can distinguish at a glance the ash of any known brand, either of cigar or tobacco. In the Boscombe Valley Mystery, Watson tells us that Holmes has authored a monograph on the ashes of 140 varieties of pipe, cigar, and cigarette tobacco. Fraser's spirit in Baker Street, relishing in the taxonomy. Doyle keeps playing the note elsewhere. The Trichinopoly cigar residue in A Study in Scarlet isn't flavor, it's evidence. Ash becomes a clue that survives the match. Fraser's curiosity didn't stop at the humidor. He self-experimented with dangerous alkaloids, physostigmine among them, because the Victorian laboratory sometimes doubled as a gladiator ring where the sport was simply not dying. Doyle poured that same bravado into Holmes. In A Study in Scarlet, Stanford worries that Holmes might cheerfully give a friend a little pinch of the latest vegetable alkaloid, and to be fair, take it himself with the same readiness. In short, what Fraser taught Doyle was that mastery of chemistry conferred power that very few could ever wield. Holmes was one of those rare masters, and because he understood its usefulness, chemistry gave him a decisive edge over the official detective and inspectors, the ability to identify venom, ash, and alkaloid residues with a calm, scientific gaze. Doyle's medical school years were lit by lectures and shadowed by a basement door. Dr. William Rutherford, his pathology professor, spotted Doyle's energy, pulled him in his lab assistant, and ushered him into the clandestine vivisection room where the darker and more brutal side of science lived. There, Doyle saw dogs injected with curare, fully conscious, utterly immobilized. He held the blade, assisted with delicate work on livers and gallbladders, and learned down in the carbolic reek what paralysis really looks like. Silence without mercy. It was traumatic. It stuck. Years later, his experiences reappear, not as lecture, but as plot. In The Sussex Vampire, the dripping Gothic is a decoy. The real truth are South American darts and a boy experimenting with paralysis. Holmes all but quotes Doyle's education, a South American household. My instinct felt the presence of those weapons upon the wall before my eyes ever saw them. If the child would prick with one of those arrows dipped in curare or some other devilish drug, it would mean death if the venom were not sucked out. And the trial run? The dog. If one were to use such a poison, would one not try it first in order to see if it had not lost its power? Even the Sign of the Fours blowpipe owes a debt to that Edinburgh lab. With Rutherford, Doyle learned a pattern he never forgot. Every new technique arrives with an ethical invoice. Knowledge comes, someone, animal or human, pays. So if Bell gave Holmes his eyes, Fraser his chemistry and tobacco, and Rutherford his shadows, then Dr. Henry Duncan Littlejohn gave him his stage. Littlejohn, Edinburgh's first medical officer of health, was no historical footnote. He was a load-bearing beam in the creation of Sherlock Holmes. A nationally renowned medical legal expert, he taught Arthur Conan Doyle that evidence isn't merely gathered, it's performed. In his lecture hall, Littlejohn didn't drone through case notes. He brought them to life with a stride across the floor, an exaggerated twist of a wrist, or the collapse of an imagined body. He staged crimes so vividly that his students could almost relive them. One moment, he was the victim struck down, the next, a perpetrator in the dock. And in the next breath, the advocate rising with a flourish to cross-examine. To study under Littlejohn was not only to analyze a case, but to feel it, its violence, its deception, its moral weight. It was to witness a master thespian upon the stage. And it was this same man who exposed notorious killers within his own profession, Dr. William Palmer and Dr. Edward Pritchard, physicians who poisoned and strangled with impunity until Littlejohn's evidence unmasked them. Doyle carried that warning into the speckled band, where Holmes declares, when a doctor does go wrong, he's the first of criminals. He has nerve and he has knowledge. Palmer and Pritchard were among the heads of their profession. Littlejohn fused courtroom rigor with stage performance, and Doyle never forgot it. And Holmes, he made it immortal. Holmes is unmistakably one of Littlejohn's disciples. Disguise in the canon is not mere masquerade. It's an investigative tool. In A Scandal in Bohemia, Holmes is compared to the actor John Hare, and even Watson concedes that the stage lost a fine actor. In The Priory School, Holmes limps through a feigned ankle injury to pry loose testimony. In The Six Napoleons, after catching a jewel thief, Holmes literally takes a bow like a master dramatist. By The Mother in Stone, he's playing two characters at once to spring his trap. And then comes the dozen of walk-on roles: clergyman, plumber, sailor, bibliophile. Each disguise echoes Littlejohn's tutelage. Gesture is data, performance is instrument. And the showmanship carried a moral edge. Littlejohn's courtroom dramas were never empty spectacle. They were exercises in truth. By reenacting crime, motive, and consequence, he taught his students that justice depended on imagination, disciplined by evidence. Doyle translated that lesson into Baker Street, where Holmes employs theater not to distort reality, but to compel it into view. The actor's timing is yoked to the scientist's conscience. The stage did not lose a fine actor. It was smuggled intact and breathing into 221B Baker Street. In the late 1870s to the early 1880s, Doyle served as medical clerk to Dr. Reginald Hoare in Birmingham, and two things fused: procedure and milieu. The surgery by day, the new theater and music halls by night, railway offices, insurance counters, and backstairs interviews in between. Under Hoare's roof, Doyle was encouraged to tell stories at the dinner table, and soon after, to submit them to magazines. It was here, in Birmingham, that Doyle learned that his Mystery of Sasassa Valley had been officially published, a South African ghost story that ran in Chambers' Edinburgh Journal. Though just a beginner sketch, Sasassa Valley already shows the contours of Doyle's later genius. An exotic setting that invites superstition, an eerie mystery that demands unraveling, and, at its core, an explanation that strips away the fantastic. Even in his first outing, Doyle was practicing the move that would become Holmes's trademark. Respect the strangeness of events, then peel back the illusion to reveal the logic underneath. That Birmingham apprenticeship also left a permanent mark. Doyle absorbed the pulse of a commercial city, where fortunes could pivot on a letterhead or collapse with a forged signature. So when he wrote The Stockbroker's Clerk, Birmingham isn't just a backdrop, it's an accomplice. Holmes and Watson arrive through the city's great rail terminus and are drawn straight into Corporation Street. the broad new boulevard of offices and counting houses where Pycroft's sham employer awaits. Entrances are timed to the minute, office corridors double as catwalks, and the city's confident facades help drive the plot. And they do because Doyle knew Birmingham from the inside, its rhythm, its risks, and the illusions that kept its engine running. In 1880, Doyle signed on as the ship's doctor aboard the Arctic whaler Hope, and enthusiastically traded his stethoscope for a harpoon. He learned how a crew thinks, how a line sings under strain, how men face fear when the ice grinds against the hull at 2 a.m, and how the ferocity of a bottle-nosed mother seal. Among the members of the crew was one unforgettable outsider, tall, dark-eyed, blue-black beard, clever, aloof, rumored to be dodging the law. Doyle filed him away in his brain attic under the label Satanic Temper, Handle with Care. Years later, that silhouette steps fully armed into Black Peter. A harpooner pins his former captain to a wall like a specimen. Tobacco pouches are made from discarded sealskin, and you can almost smell the tar and brine blowing straight off the deck of the Hope. Doyle even keeps the name of the outlaw. Captain Peter Carey echoes that of Peter Mackenzie, the Hope's real harpooner. That's the larger pattern tonight. A life experience becomes inspiration and a case file. On a later voyage as a ship's doctor aboard the Mayumba, Doyle journeyed down the West African coast. There he fell into long conversation with John Henry Smith, a former slave who had risen to become an American diplomat to Liberia. Erudite, legally trained, morally grounded, and among the first Black men to hold a governmental post. 3 weeks of shipboard talk rewired Doyle's assumptions about race and ability. He does not preach about it in his memoir. Instead, he subtly infuses it into his stories. In The Yellow Face, a highly educated Black lawyer from the American South marries an Englishwoman, and the plot's ethical fulcrum is empathy, not exposure. And then there's The Five Orange Pips, where the Ku Klux Klan's acts of terror take center stage. These are not lighthearted tales. They're a detective writer's quiet confession of his convictions and of his awareness of the plight of the newly freed slaves of the Confederacy. Outside the canon, the tribute is even more transparent. The Narrative of John Smith, a title that honors the diplomat who refined Doyle's sense of justice and tempered the pull of bias. With Smith aboard the Mayumba, Doyle learned the principles Holmes would later practice instinctively. Follow the facts, but never lose sight of the human being behind the data. On January 28, 1887, Doyle was initiated into the Freemasons at Phoenix Lodge number 257 in Portsmouth. Within weeks, he advanced to Master Mason. The experience wasn't merely social, it was ritualistic, almost semiotic. Rings, grips, working tools, catechisms, a language of private meaning. Doyle internalized that jargon of his secret order and carried it into the canon. In A Study in Scarlet, we glimpse a gold ring with a Masonic device. In The Valley of Fear, we witness lodge room customs. Characters exchange grips, defend charity, and speak in ritual tones. In The Red-Headed League, Holmes gently scolds a client for wearing an arc and compass breastpin in public, which he knows is against the strict rules of your order. And in The Musgrave Ritual, a catechism passed down through generations becomes a treasure map hidden in plain sight. What do Lodge teach? Rituals carry meaning if you hold the key. Doyle passed that knowledge to Holmes, making him the consummate decoder, a detective who treats society like a puzzle, reading its signs, unlocking its secrets, and revealing the structures beneath the ordinary. After medical school, Doyle paid a visit to his mother's side of the family in Ireland. While there, he fell in love with a girl named Elmo Weldon. They quickly became engaged, but those plans were tragically interrupted when she was diagnosed with tuberculosis. The only real therapy at the time was high altitude, clean air, and hope. which led Doyle to choose the Alpine Sanatoria at Davos for her health and possible recovery. Over the next few months, their engagement faltered, but the illness did not. In 1893, the same year Doyle wrote The Adventure where Moriarty hurled Holmes off the Great Falls of Reichenbach, Elmo died from complications of her illness. Read The Final Problem quickly, and you see only a death match upon a cliff. But read it slowly, and you hear a Shakespearean love story stitched into the chase. A woman in the last stages of consumption who had wintered at Davos Platz, dead of a sudden hemorrhage. That's Elmo, memorialized not with a eulogy, but with a quiet, loving paragraph. See, Doyle rarely makes a spectacle of grief. Instead, he scatters his emotions across the page like breadcrumbs for attentive readers to follow. That's part of why the canon ages so well. Beneath the cases and clues runs a human pulse, loss, loyalty, the price of knowledge. Holmes may be the ideal reasoner, but the stories are powered by what Doyle had lived. Okay, now I'm going to shift gears a bit. In 1894, Doyle stated that of all the books and stories he read by American authors, The Scarlet Letter was by far his favorite. He liked it so much that he used it as an outline for his first Holmes tale, A Study in Scarlet. Not exactly a line-by-line copy, but pretty close, adopting Hawthorne's grammar, themes, symbols, and plot, which is the final piece in my discussion of the secret origins of Sherlock Holmes. To start, let me provide you with a little background information. Nathaniel Hawthorne lived and wrote in the Berkshire Mountains of western Massachusetts, the very landscape in which he composed The House of the Seven Gables. In the very first paragraphs of A Study in Scarlet, Doyle tips his hat to that exact location by pulling Watson out of a Berkshire regiment before bringing him home to England. And the narrators match moods in their respective opening lines. Hawthorne's voice broods over Salem's decayed wooden warehouses and dilapidated wharves. Watson, still recovering from his wounds and dysentery, calls London a great cesspool. And in both novels, the narrators reflect upon 3 long years of hardship. And the bigger picture is the same. And listen carefully, please, for compass directions. Hawthorne's tale takes us back to the westward voyage of the Puritans, risking their lives to establish a new, stricter Eden. Doyle mirrors that movement, first by sending Watson from the east, Afghanistan, to the west, England, and then rewinding his tale to 1847 for another westward trek, the Mormon journey from Illinois towards their promised land around the Great Salt Lake. In both narratives, faith pushes the story west in search of a place where religion can be practiced freely. Now I need you all to picture Doyle with Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter open on his desk, pencil in hand. He's underlining certain words and phrases he likes. Young clerk, not a close friend, pale sailor, hospital lounger, idler, 3-legged stool, gold dig gold in California. Then, like an alchemist, Doyle transmutes them. He makes Stanford a young surgical clerk who had never been a particular crony of Watson. Yet Watson hails him like a long-lost friend. We learn that Watson was a pale army officer who was rushed to a base hospital at Peshawar. Discharged, he sails on board the Orontes to Portsmouth and, by his own admission, is swept into London, that great cesspool into which all the loungers and idlers of the empire are irresistibly drained. Same signposts, new road. Hawthorne's nouns become Doyle's plot. Hawthorne's narrator then describes the personality of the people he works with as so cold and lifeless that they resemble the rigidity of dead corpses. It's a chilling image, and one that Doyle could not dare glance over. In fact, he reimagines this macabre scene with his own haunting twist. How so? In A Study in Scarlet, Stanford describes Sherlock Holmes as peculiar, detached, and unfeeling. Already, Holmes embodies the same cold and lifeless qualities depicted by Hawthorne. But Stanford doesn't stop there. In a moment of almost theatrical revelation, he tells Watson that Holmes has been caught striking cadavers. Yes, rigid, dead corpses with a stick. Just let that image settle in. The very persona we have come to associate with Sherlock Holmes, the brilliant, aloof, robotically cold detective who seems to care little beyond the case at hand, a man so emotionally distanced that he beats rotting corpses with wooden sticks, traces its very origins back to this particular sentence found within Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter. This almost inhuman episode becomes a cornerstone of Holmes's character, crystallizing his clinical detachment for the remainder of the canon. When Watson is introduced to Holmes, his future roommate shouts out, "I have found a reagent which is precipitated by hemoglobin, one that can determine whether blood discovered at the scene of a crime is old or new." At this moment, Holmes isn't simply dabbling in science, he is practically consumed by a desire for blood, mirroring those exact sentiments employed by Hawthorne. Holmes's obsession is satisfied by the simple act of pricking his finger with a long bodkin for the sake of all humanity. Watson waxes poetic to describe this momentous occasion. Had Holmes discovered a gold mine, greater delight could not have shone upon his features. His sentiments are a perfect reflection of Hawthorne's words, which are, quote, "Go dig gold in California where he is soon to be made happy. Same precious metal, same emotional register, same concept of salvation through labor." And just to wait a second here, as a practicing physician, Doyle would have known that long bodkins aren't used for pricking fingers. Lancets are. However, long bodkins are used to pull thread or cord through fabric, such as is required, for example, to sew a scarlet letter A onto a blouse, something the skilled seamstress Hester Prynne had accomplished in the opening chapter of the Scarlet Letter. These aren't just shared motifs. They are literary threads woven from one author's vision into another's masterpiece. And Holmes, in his literary debut, stands not just as a detective, but as a stitched figure, pieced together from Hawthorne's psychological cloth, reanimated by Doyle's imagination and life experiences. And what about Holmes's signature instrument? In the Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne muses that a man may glorify God by being a fiddler. In his vision, music is not diversion, but transcendence, a language to reach the divine. Decades later, Watson echoes the thought, saying that a well-played violin is a treat for the gods. Doyle takes Hawthorne's transcendental note and gives it to Holmes, that worthless fiddle reborn as a priceless Amati. Suddenly, the violin in Baker Street is not a quirk at all. It's a sacrament. When boredom bites or facts fall short, Holmes takes up the bow, not to soothe his nerves, but to pray. Each phrase becomes a private devotion, each note a call from Baker Street to the heavens. And Doyle, the master of subtle innuendo, drops another Hawthorne-related breadcrumb for the readers to pick up in plain sight. And believe it or not, it's the Trichinopoly cigar ash that was discovered at number 3 Lauriston Gardens. Holmes, able to determine the variety, of course, announces his expertise in identifying tobacco residue, a skill which sets him apart from Scotland Yard. And we all nod along. But here's why that tiny tidbit matters. Trichinopoly cigars are a product of only 2 regions, and they're both found in southern India, and those 2 regions touch each other. One is, of course, Trichinopoly. The other is Salem. Yes, Salem, India. I'm sure some of you might be aware that the Scarlet Letter takes place in Salem, Massachusetts, the port city where Nathaniel Hawthorne was born and raised. With one quick stroke, Doyle has built a literary bridge across continents. connecting two different Salems, one known for its tobacco, the other for its scarlet letter. Spot it, and you've uncovered one of those secret doors I mentioned earlier. Miss it, and the plot still sings. Doyle follows the scarlet letter almost like a recipe, lifting Hawthorne's opening notes and reformulating them into Holmes's mind and methods. Let me explain. Hawthorne's narrator confesses that he cared not for literature and that the nature of the earth and sky had passed away out of his mind. Doyle turns that detachment into engineered selectivity. So Watson can report, half appalled, half amused, that Holmes is ignorant of literature, knows nothing of the Copernican theory, and is unaware of the composition of the solar system. This is not stupidity on Holmes's part. It is homage on Doyle's. Even the rooms rhyme. Hawthorne's lofty custom house, stove with a voluminous funnel, an old pine desk, a three-legged stool, quietly slides into St. Bartholomew's lofty lab. A wooden bench, a high three-legged stool, and flames rising from metal tubes analogous to stove funnels. Hawthorne says the past leaves a stain. Doyle turns that into procedure. Holmes, hand-painted with chemicals, lectures on brownish stains, blood, mud, rust, or fruit. And just after that, Nathaniel Hawthorne's narrator measures himself against two of the greatest writers who also doubled as custom house agents, Burns and Chaucer, and then confesses that he longs for literary fame. Doyle recasts the hunger as Holmes's fierce self-positioning, the tart dismissal of two detectives, Dupin and Lecoq, the open bid to be the best. Line by line, Doyle isn't copying, he's cooking. Detachment into focus, rooms into laboratories, stains into evidence, ambition into vocation, until Hawthorne's batter hardens into the temperament of Sherlock Holmes. And Doyle made sure to include a scarlet letter A of his own design inside A Study in Scarlet. And here's where you can find it. On the wall at Lauriston Gardens, someone, Jefferson Hope, as we will learn, has written Rache in blood. Holmes notes that Rache is German for revenge, but then Holmes narrows our gaze to a single character, the letter A, pointing out its Germanic stroke. Doyle makes us all stare at that single blood-red letter A. In that moment, the letter becomes a rubric, marked in scarlet and meant to guide us, telling the attentive reader how to interpret the case. Hester wears her A on cloth. London gets one scrolled on plaster. Each is both lure and warning, compressing identity and guilt into a single sign, if you dare look long enough. Doyle is not plagiarizing Hawthorne. He's in conversation with him, scarlet to scarlet. The symbol becomes solvent and touchstone, seeping into setting, character, and method, until Holmes feels inevitable. A westward journey recast as a London detective tale, bound together by the same scarlet stitching. I hope you enjoyed our hop through Edinburgh, the detour to Stonyhurst, the risky business on a whaling deck, and that last expedition into colonial America, all to learn Holmes's secrets. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if later tonight you reopen A Study in Scarlet and notice a long bodkin instead of a lancet, or a scarlet letter A staring back at you, give Hawthorne a nod. When Holmes bows like an actor, shout out, "Bravo, Little John!" When Holmes reads the life from a cuff, a discarded Trichinopoly ash, tip your deerstalker to Bell and Fraser. When the irregulars outmaneuver the yard, remember a 5-year-old gang champion with fireworks in his pockets. The 19th century conspired to invent Holmes and then handed Doyle the pen. We've nearly followed the red thread. The game's afoot. Now it's your turn to hunt for clues. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dan. That was fascinating. Stands to reason that Doyle would have used things he knew about from his own life to popularise his ideas and his stories. I was particularly interested in your connections to William Burton and sumo wrestling. There was and all the Robert Louis Stevenson links were great as well. Pretty good stuff.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Perhaps you can stop screen sharing now. We can get.
Oh, yes. Okay.
and we
I
can
can
get,
do that. I can do. Okay.
All right.
Yes. That's sharing. Yes.
It's a hell of a lot of research you and your father have done. So it's certainly fantastic ideas there. And you've written a lot of articles about this as well, haven't you? You published quite a few pieces in various society magazines and other journals.
Hey, I've been published in two with you.
You have indeed, yes.
Yes.
That was great.
pleasure.
Anybody got any questions for Dan? He's put a lot of thoughts into our mind, that's for sure.
It's a lot to digest. Great research. Thank you, Daniel. Excellent.
I don't think I'll ever be able to look at the books the same again.
That's
No,
very
every
true.
time every time you reread them, you find something new. I'm telling you, you just do. There's so much in there. It's like a different dimension.
Most like Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So I guess your research is still continuing, Dan. What's your current project you're working on?
I have an article, I believe, coming out. I think two, one of which is coming out in the Baker Street Journal, I believe now, but the mail it's hard to get. And that one's going to be on who is truly Moriarty. So my research will hopefully people won't kill me, but the Baker Street people liked it and they said it was pretty good. So I have some interesting information about that, and I think I can put a real name to that character.
Really? That should make intriguing reading, that's for sure.
Amazing. Daniel, can I ask something just about your two books? Sorry, might be talking about someone.
No, fire away, fire away.
I was just wondering, the two books that you've published on Doyle, are they in paperback only, or is there a hardcover edition at all?
They both have hardcover.
Okay.
But I will say one thing, and it's not to be. This is not being mean to my publisher. The editor I had on my first book did not believe in the project, and I greenlighted the book the way I thought it was going to be published. I only found out, I think it was like 4 years later, that the book was nothing like what I wrote, and the publisher apologized profusely and republished the book the original way. So the paperback on that one's the only one I would ever buy. And the hardcover Doyle's World, there is one. And I don't know if it's easy for me to send, or if you would like, there's post I can always mail.
Great, thank you.
Oh, Dan, look, I have a question with regard to one of those books, The Strange Case of Dr. Doyle, A Journey into Madness and Mayhem. I read a review of that in the Doings of Doyle, and I must say that poor Chapman, he was he took offence at it. But can you just give us a very very brief outline of what the concept of that book is?
Oh, absolutely. So I know a lot of us are here because when we were kids, we had that double set of Sherlock Holmes books, those green big books by, Baring Gould. And of course, I read those stories as a kid by my dad too, but I really wasn't. That wasn't what got me into this, the Sherlock Holmes, the fascination. It was really during medical school, and as I was studying for my board exams, I would go into the library and read articles in old British medical journals or the Lancet, and I was finding a lot of things written about Doyle or by Doyle. And as a future pediatrician, I decided I wanted to really follow and see what his life was, what he did, where he was born, what his growth and development would lead to. But what I was seeing, you have to remember that the later part of his life, he's dealing with fairies and spiritualism and the great beyond, and he's writing articles for Light, and his mother's really not really talking to him as much, and she's living with another family member, not her rich son. And I said, what happened here? So I that first book is my research on Doyle's early life. Of course, it explores everything that goes on between his birth and up to until age 30. So I actually stopped the book when he turns 30. And I think I got that from like a movie. I think Charleston Heston said you never trust anybody over the age of 30. And that's where I drew the line. And it's quite honestly, for the Sherlockian, I don't think it would be the book I would read. If I were a Sherlockian, I would read more of Doyle's world, which is more of what we spoke about today, and other things that I've written or have researched in the past. You know, who the first Sherlockian was, um, who the first woman was, the Robert Louis Stevenson Treasure Island, a Scarlet, a study in Scarlet, the Scarlet Letter. That's more, I would think, if I was a Sherlockian, I would enjoy that material. The other one's more, as you were saying before, you have a book about Jack the Ripper and Sherlock Holmes, and it's more on that line. And then you have to kind of get rid of all bias when you read it. It's a tough read for those who love Sherlock Holmes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
But I'm not saying the research in it is bad. It's not. The research is really you have to remember, you can see I appreciate Doyle in every facet of his life. I love his stories, not just Sherlock Holmes, but you talk about the Mummy life, these are the things I love about him. So it's not that I don't respect Doyle. It's just that there are certain things that I found and I just couldn't glimpse over. I said, everybody was talking about certain aspects of Doyle's life. And of course, people also say, "Hey, who is Jack the Ripper? What are the things that he did? What did he do? What could he have been? Was he a doctor? Was he a mason? There were certain aspects I had to find and do some heavy duty research into before I put that out."
Thank you.
But yes, a lot of people did not like it, and especially if you're going to look at a Sherlock Holmes board, that book's going to that's going to be toasted. It's going to go in the fireplace.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent stuff, Dan. I think we're just blown away by the amount of material you've put in front of us. There's just so much to think about. It's incredible.
Thank you.
Well, certainly, as John said, read the stories differently from now on. We see all those references and know where they came from. Yeah.
There was an article that I published. I think this one went to the Canadian Homes, and it was about the empty house. And I think that would be one of the, if I could get my hands on anything, that's an interesting story too, because he's actually, all the things you read in that story are all a tribute to a friend he just lost. I don't know if you know who Grant Allen is. He was a very prolific writer. And Doyle actually helped write two of the final chapters of his last book. And when you see these words like, he was a neighbor of mine in that story, and going to Tibet, and going to Mecca, and all these places that he's stopping in, they're all right. And like going to Venice after he falls off Reichenbach, he tells you all of these things are a tribute to Grant Allen. I mean, I'm sure I have a Grant Allen book on my thing here, and if I pulled it out, should probably over here actually somewhere. It would be my trip to Venice, or my dealings with the Dalai Lama. That article I like too. I thought that was a very interesting one. It's very similar to the Robert Louis Stevenson and very similar to Nathaniel Hawthorne's.
Okay, it's more and more links all the time. All right, I think that's about it for now. Erin, do you want to talk about the log at all? Anything you want to say about the next issue that's coming in?
It's hopefully coming soon. It should be, we'll get a few extra pages in than we normally do, which is great, particularly with Christmas coming up, something for people to read. And as always, if anyone wants to put their fingers to the keyboard and contribute something, everything is always welcome.
Great, thanks a lot. So as I mentioned, the next slog is being worked on right now between Erin, Roseanne, and myself, and Lee. I'm sure you're involved as well. And we hope to get out in
He
the
has been.
mail.
He's been very, very helpful.
Hope to get out in the mail with it before 2 weeks are up, so maybe 10 or 12 days. They'll be hitting the post office with that one. And then the next issue after that is going to be planned sometime in the first quarter of next year, maybe February or March, something like that. So it's a production line for sure, but it's well worth it. So thanks everybody for your attendance. Hope you enjoyed yourself. A big thank you to Dan for an incredible amount of work you and research you put in front of us today. You and your father are certainly prolific researchers and writers. It's great to have the output of your combined minds in front of us. Thanks to John for the work he's going to do on the editing of this video to go up on YouTube.
I have to take some aspirin because there's so much information there. Like I said, I'm having a mental hernia.
Bill, I can see Mike is just asking there about the date of and time of the next meeting online. Do we know what date the next one will be exactly?
It's roughly going to be mid-February. I'm going to exact date lined up with the presenter yet, but we're aiming for mid-February.
Okay.
So I'll put out a notice about that on Facebook and also maybe an email to let you all know as soon as I have confirmed things.
Thank you.
All right, that's about it for now. Thank you, Dan. You can go to bed now. Sorry, you're on mute, Dan. I can't hear what you're saying.
Well, I'm saying thank you so much for having me. Thanks for allowing me to do this. And it was definitely worth it. Let me tell you, I enjoy this so much.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. We'll be in touch when things are cooking for the next online meeting. Let you know all the ins and outs of that. So bye for now. And
Have a good Christmas, everyone.
Very Merry Christmas to everybody.
Christmas. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year.